Some of you are voting for your own destruction. Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. 5 Democrat policies that are hurting you today. That's the focus of today's podcast. Man, we got a lot to unpack here today. Let's see what we're going to cover. We got to talk about the minimum wage, equal pay for equal work. We're going to discuss government schools, Social Security, and we're going to round everything out by talking about the effectiveness of licensing boards. Before we get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First of all, like this video, subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a notifications bell. Click it, it'll notify you the next time we release a new show. If you're on Rumble, though, to your upper right-hand corner, you'll see a share button. Click that one, and it'll share this video with a friend of yours who should have been here today. Go ahead and do all of those that apply right now. The minimum wage. The Democrat Party has built up a reputation fighting for the little guy. But is that reputation well-deserved? The ultimate little guy policy is the minimum wage, a policy that mandates employers pay a minimum wage to their employees. On the surface, the minimum wage law sounds great. The premise is that the cost of living goes up, so as the cost of living goes up, so should your wages. And since your employer can't be relied upon to increase your wages to match that living increase, the theory is that government will step in and force that increase for you. The minimum wage law was enacted in 1938 under the Fair Labor Standards Act during FDR's administration. FDR is considered somewhat of a model for many Democrats. Much of what many conservatives consider huge examples of government overreach occurred during FDR's administration and still exist to this day. As we examine these leftist policies, you're going to see a pattern emerge. On the surface, they all sound good until you start to examine who is actually receiving the benefit. Then you'll start to see that little guy reputation unravel, and you'll start to realize these policies were never based on any fact. They were always based on feeling. Nothing more than feelings. See, before FDR was elected in 1932, there was a man by the name of Sidney Webb. Now, Sidney Webb was a socialist economist who wrote an economic paper in 1912 entitled The Economic Theory of a Legal Minimum Wage. This paper is still available for you to download to this day on the internet. You should read it. It will give you great insight as to the original intent of the minimum wage. I'll give you a hint. It wasn't to protect the little guy. Let's read some of it, shall we? I'm going to start from the word there. There would still remain to be considered the remnant who, notwithstanding the increased demand for adult male labor and independent female labor, proved to be incapable of earning the legal minimum in any capacity whatsoever. We should, in fact, be brought face to face with the problem not of the unemployed, but of the unemployable. Wonder who he's talking about there. Those whom no employer would employ at the legal minimum, even if trade was booming and he could get nobody else. The unemployable, to put it bluntly, do not and cannot, under any circumstances, earn their keep. What we have to do with them is to see that as few as possible of them are produced. I'm going to skip around here to the interesting parts, if you don't mind. Now I'm going to start with the word but. But of all ways of dealing with these unfortunate parasites, ouch, he called them parasites. But of all ways of dealing with these unfortunate parasites, the most ruinous to the community is to allow them unrestrainedly to compete as wage earners for situations. For this at once prevents competition from resulting in the selection of the most fit, and thus defeats its very object. In the absence of any common rule, it will, as we have seen, often pay an employer to select the physical or moral invalid who offers his services for a parasitic wage, rather than the most efficient working man who stands out for the conditions necessary for the maintenance of his efficiency. So which is it? Is the minimum wage law a law that was designed for the benefit of the little guy in mind? Or is the minimum wage law a law that was carefully crafted to avoid having to compete with the poor and uneducated? I mean, stop me when we get to the looking out for the little guy part. I'm sure someone's going to say, though, hey, just because this economic paper was written with nefarious intentions, it doesn't mean our minimum wage law acts this way. FDR may have been totally oblivious to its negative effects. Yeah, okay. So it's just a coincidence that before the minimum wage law was instituted, the black unemployment rate was actually slightly lower than that of whites. And after the minimum wage law was instituted, the black unemployment rate has been consistently higher than that of whites, even to this day. Just a coincidence? It's not a coincidence. It's economics 101. Price has always been used to either encourage or discourage human behavior. When a new television comes out, the price is always higher to test the market, to see what the general public will pay. Because very little is known about the product, that and a combination of its price make people that less willing to take a risk on owning it. Well, if it's true about the cost of a television, what about the cost of labor? How many employers are willing to take a $15 an hour risk on an unskilled, uneducated applicant? The answer is not many. If you're going to pay this price, employers feel better having an already skilled, already educated applicant, which explains the reason why the teenage unemployment rate is always phenomenally higher than our standard unemployment rate. Let me give you a real-world scenario. I used to sell education for a large real estate company. I tried several ways of marketing to find buyers for that education. One day I ran a Craigslist ad to see if I could find someone who'd be willing to hold a sign for me by the interstate. It worked for other businesses, so I just wanted to test it. I didn't have much money to pay someone. I just wanted to test the concept to see if it might be worth it. When I added up all the cash that I had on hand, I had about maybe $55, and I wanted them to stand outside all day so that I could get a full test to see if this really worked. It didn't take but a few minutes before somebody emailed me and complained. That's illegal what you're doing. The minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, and you're paying them less than that. So now I was worried. I wasn't trying to commit a crime. I was just trying to hire someone. I was just about to delete my ad when someone responded. It was a woman by the name of Susie. She was living in one of those rent-by-the-day motels with her husband. They had one cell phone, one car, and he was the only one working. Now, it's been such a long time since this happened, I honestly can't remember all the details of how we worked everything out, but she ended up working for me, and she was so elated, so excited to actually have some money to be able to get something to eat and to be able to contribute something. I told this story to some Democrats on a Zoom call that I was invited to, and they were all upset because I was originally going to pay her less than a minimum wage. And I tried to explain to them that I wasn't purposely trying to pay her less than a minimum wage. It was all the money I had, and I knew that if I didn't have her at least stand out there for a full 8-hour day, that the test was practically useless. So it's not like I was trying to do it, but once I factored in how much money I had divided by 8 hours, it came out to less than $7.25 an hour. But here's what was really interesting about that Zoom call. They were all beating me up over the fact that I was trying to hire this person, but when I asked them the critical question, what would you do? Notice their answer. I said, what would you do if you had a certain amount of money and you needed someone to be out there all day, and by the time you calculated how much that equated to per hour, it ended up being less than a minimum wage? What would you do? And they all said the same thing to me. If I couldn't afford to pay her the minimum, then I've got no business trying to hire somebody. I guess they missed that part where she needed something to eat. So let me get this straight. I have a woman with no job living in a rent-by-the-week motel. She has nothing to eat. She has no cell phone because her husband needs it for work. She has no reliable means of transportation because her husband also needs that for work. And you're telling me that you'd rather see her starve than for you to pay her any less than a minimum wage? Yeah, so much for the little guy theory. Or little woman in this case. Not only does the minimum wage law hurt the poor and unskilled, but it also works to kill capitalism. It makes criminals out of businesses who are trying to help society in general. When new immigrants come to our country, they come for the opportunity to earn a living. Many times they're the most uneducated and unskilled among us, not even speaking the language. But due to our minimum wage law, customs enforcement calls hiring at less than a minimum wage exploitation. So as you can see, under the minimum wage law, if the little guy isn't protected, then who does it protect? The answer is the unions. The unions collect dues from every employee while simultaneously using strikes to push for a higher minimum wage. It's kind of a twist of irony because the salary for a union business agent can be as high as $217,000 a year, all by collecting dues from the little guy. You'll notice from this article's headline that the only ones who seem to be in favor of repealing the minimum wage or freedom of wages are Republicans. So the age-old question that young people are always asking, how can I get experience if no one will hire me, can only be answered by the repeal of the minimum wage law, which apparently was designed to keep unskilled, uneducated people from competing in the first place. Very similar to the fighting for the little guy lie is the fighting for equality lie. The Equal Pay Act was enacted in 1963 under President Kennedy. Its claimed purpose was to make sure that women were paid the exact same thing as men as long as they were doing the exact same work. What are the results? The result is we still see women to this day protesting that they're discriminated against when it comes to wage equality. So did the law help? Apparently not. This is yet another example of the Democrats thinking they could use government to force a sexist employer to be equal, when actually the free market is far more efficient at it. Here, Milton Friedman explains this concept perfectly.
Okay, Mr. Friedman, referring to the statements that you made about women who advocate equal pay for equal work.
Gee, I thought I'd get a rise out of that sooner or later. Delighted to have it.
Yes, okay, I just would like to know if you're insinuating or perhaps, point blankly saying that women and other minorities' skills are inferior to those now holding those jobs, and that they need to go through a period where their skills need to be improved and therefore deserve to be paid less?
No, I don't think desert has anything to do with it. I'm not, first of all, I think desert is an impossible thing to decide. Who deserves what? Nobody deserves anything. Thank God we don't get what we deserve. But I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying a very different thing. I'm saying that the actual effect of requiring equal pay for equal work will be to harm women. If women's skills are higher than men's in a particular job and are recognized to be higher, the law does no good, because then they will be able to compete away and can get the same income. If their skills are less for whatever reason, maybe it isn't because it's their sex, maybe it's because they were out of the labor force, maybe it's for other reasons, and you say the only way you are able to hire them is by paying the same wage, then you're denying them the only weapon they have to fight with. If the unwillingness of the men to hire them is because the men are sexist, what's the phrase, racist, sexist pigs or whatever, if that's the only reason they want to hire them, nonetheless, you want to make it costly to them to exercise their prejudice. If you say to them, you have to pay the same wage no matter whether you hire women or men, then here's Mr. Sexist Pig. It doesn't cost him anything to hire men instead of women. However, if the women are free to compete and to say, well, now look, I'll offer my work for less, then he can only hire men if he bears a cost. If the women are really good as a man, then he's paying a price for discriminating. And what you are doing, not intentionally, but by misunderstanding, when you try to get equal pay for equal work laws, is what you are doing is reducing to zero the cost imposed on people who are discriminating for irrelevant reasons. And I would like to see a cost imposed on them. I'm on your side, but you're not.
Government schools. You probably noticed that I called them government schools and not public schools. Watch this video all the way to the end. I've got a special link for you at the very end of this video about the many words that the left has created over the years to really hide what's going on in politics. Now, you've heard the phrase, you get what you pay for, but do we really? When it comes to government schooling, do you really get what you pay for? According to educationdata.org, we spend on average $12,624 per pupil to educate our children in government school. $12,624 per child. That's a lot of money per child. If there's anyone who should be represented as the little guy, surely we're doing right by our children, right?
75% of black kids in California cannot read at state levels of proficiency. 50% of all kids in the public sector, public universities in California, K through 12, cannot read at state levels of proficiency. I went to Crenshaw High School. That was the school that was featured in Boys in the Hood. I just checked yesterday, 2% are math proficient. And it's a school that's dominated by the gang called the Crips. Who the hell sends their kid to a high school where only 2% are math proficient and a school that's dominated by Crips if they can get out? The majority of inner city parents, black and brown, both want choice. But they keep pulling that lever for Democrats that don't give them choice.
So what are we getting for 12 grand? So who benefits? Are you starting to see a pattern? The individuals themselves don't benefit. It's always to the benefit of some regulated community. The labor unions under the minimum wage, and the teachers union under government schools. Unfortunately, the state of California voted to keep their current governor, Gavin Newsom. But given the data, can you honestly say that comparing Democrat policy to Republican policy, can you honestly say that 2% math efficiency is considered progress? 2% math efficiency is practically the same as 0% math efficiency. If you paid an institution $12,000 and got those type of results, what is the appropriate response for that type of performance? With Republican school choice, you don't have to ask who benefits. The answer is kind of obvious. Your child does. And so does the parent, since you're being taxed anyway. Social Security. I'll actually let Milton Friedman explain to you how Social Security was sold to us, so at least you'll understand what Social Security was supposed to be. Then I'll tell you what Social Security actually is, and you can determine for yourself whether Social Security is helping the little guy.
Now, Social Security is also sold as a program to benefit the poor. What are the facts? Social Security is a program which imposes unduly heavy taxes on the lower income groups in the society to provide higher benefits to upper income groups in the society. How does it work? It's not because of the regressive nature of the wage tax. It's not because of the structure of benefits. It's because of a very simple phenomenon. At what age do younger men from the lower classes go to work? 16, 17, 18, 19. That's when they start to pay Social Security taxes. At what age are you people going to go to work and start paying Social Security taxes? Some of you may, in part-time jobs, have been doing so. But you will be a full-time Social Security payers only when you reach your middle 20s. So they will pay taxes for more years than you will pay taxes. Next, which one is going to receive benefits for longer? Every demographic study has shown that the average expected length of life of middle and upper income classes is longer than the average length of life of people from the lower income classes. So those poor suckers are going to pay taxes for more years and receive payments for fewer years than you and I will. Now, some of us, by virtue of continuing to work between 65 and 72, will not be in that favored class. But already, the fraction of people who work between 65 and 72 has been cut to a small part of what it used to be because of the incentive offered by Social Security. And overall, there is little doubt, therefore, that Social Security is a program which transfers income from low-income classes to high-income classes.
Now that you understand what Social Security is supposed to be, let me tell you what it actually is. Do you remember this guy? His name was Bernie Madoff. They say he was responsible for the biggest fraud in financial history. He died after having been sentenced to 150 years in prison when he scammed investors out of $50 billion. Yes, 50 billion with a B. $50 billion with his Ponzi scheme. You know what a Ponzi scheme is, right? That's when you pay your investors not from the profits of some successful venture, but from the money you collected from other investors. That's not real growth. It's all based on a lie. It's just taking advantage of people's ignorance while you live a lavish lifestyle living on other people's money. Sooner or later, someone is left holding the bag. It happens all the time. If you've ever watched a show called American Greed, almost every case involves a Ponzi scheme of some sort. Wait a minute, how do we get on the subject of fraud and Ponzi schemes? Oh yes, we were talking about Social Security. Again, sold to us by FDR's administration. Is this an example of helping the little guy? Under conservatism, minimal government means that the government was never taking your money under the guise of retirement in the first place. You're in control of your own retirement. Many of us have started businesses that pay 100 times what Social Security pays, like investing in real estate. Some have started stores or businesses that have been in your family for generations, all paying far more than Social Security. And the beauty of you being in control is that you know exactly who it benefits. It benefits you, it benefits your spouse, it benefits your children and grandchildren. Ready to make some money? Not so fast. You probably need a license for that. There are a lot of professions that you probably don't realize you need a license in order for you to do it. Are you a woman who enjoys putting on makeup? Well, in about 36 states, you're going to need a license before you can start counting your money. The same thing with being a security guard, an auctioneer, a painter, a travel agent, an interior designer, because rearranging people's furniture could have dire consequences. The licensing board is there to protect you, or that's what they say. They're the ones who protect you by making sure only competent professionals are offering you services. But is that really why they exist? To protect you? Justina Clayton moved from Africa to Utah. For 4 years, she made money from home by braiding hair, which she learned in Africa, before the government shut her down for not having a cosmetology license. They required her to take 2,000 hours of classroom instruction. That's 40 hours per week for 50 weeks. Her lawyer, Paul Avalar from the Institute of Justice, sued the government and won 7 out of 7 cases.
Paul Avalar, her lawyer from the Institute for Justice, which took her case for free. Paul, the license costs thousands of dollars for a class that's useless? Really?
That's correct. In all those 2,000 hours, they don't spend any time teaching you how to braid.
So why do they pass a rule like that?
Well, what happened was the state just passed a really broad law and left it to the cosmetology board to interpret it and enforce it. And the cosmetology board is made up entirely of cosmetologists who don't like competition.
So they get to work with government to keep competition out. And Justina, you were doing this for 4 years, and then you think a competitor complained?
Yes, I actually got an email. The email threatened to report me to the licensing division if I continue to braid.
The license they say Justina needs costs thousands of dollars, and not one of those 2,000 hours of classroom instruction involves anything having to do with African hair braiding. So what's the real purpose of the licensing board? By now you should start to see a pattern. I mean, at the rate of $2,000 per day, two things should be very clear to you. One, the government is making money, not the little guy. And two, all of those cosmetologists on the board were planning to rest easy knowing that Justina would never be able to enter into business anytime soon. But nothing here is protecting the public safety, and there's certainly nothing here to help poor people make ends meet. Economist Walter E. Williams used to drive a taxi back in 1957. He made $125 a week back then to make ends meet, and he didn't need a license. You shouldn't have to ask me what the conservative alternative is, because you already know that free market capitalism invented companies like Uber and Lyft, which the cab companies absolutely hated for the very reasons we've been discussing this entire time. At the end of the day, the left hates competition, which ironically is the exact same tool that poor people use to pull themselves out of poverty. Democrat policies pretend to help the little guy, all the while working to destroy him behind the scenes. Well, we never get it all, but we certainly unpacked a lot. There's obviously more than 5 crappy Democrat policies, but in this episode, we had covered the minimum wage. We talked about equal pay for equal work. We discussed the efficiency of government schools, Social Security, and we rounded everything out by talking about the efficiency or inefficiency of licensing boards. Do this. Watch our next podcast. It's the episode I was telling you about. It's leftist words you want to be careful of because some of you are saying things you don't really mean. Watch it now by clicking the video to your left. To your right is our latest show. Click either one to go there right now. I'll conclude this episode with the words of Henry David Thoreau. If I knew for certain that a man was coming to my house with a conscious design of doing me good, I should run for my life. I'm Rob Lett, and I approve this message.